Hi, this is going to be a new series called Bible Basics, a series of episodes about Bible basics, how to read the Bible and how to approach it. As someone who maybe doesn't know a lot about it. When I first began reading the Bible in earnest, it was as an adult. I was about 26 years old. I had graduated from college when I was 20, so I'd been out in the business world for a while. And I was provoked to read it because a guy was telling me that he'd accepted Jesus Christ as his Lord and Savior. And I thought, this is crazy. I was agnostic at the time. I'd been raised Catholic, but I left it when I became a teenager, probably 12 or 13. I became a practicing agnostic. I didn't go around telling everybody I'm an agnostic, but I wasn't an atheist. I didn't feel like I had enough knowledge to say there was no God, but I just knew that I didn't know, and the Catholic Church and its rituals weren't doing anything for me in that regard. And certainly, I was never taught to read the Bible. We had a family Bible at home, but anyway, to cut all that short, I've written about that elsewhere. I didn't know where to start. So what got me thinking about this, about doing this series, was my wife and I were watching this podcast that had been uploaded to YouTube, and it was by a guy named Sean Ryan. You might know him. Apparently he's doing really well. Got like 3.5 million subscribers on YouTube, and I guess he distributes through other platforms as well, so who knows what his total subscriber count is. But he's an interesting fella. He's a former Navy SEAL and CIA contractor, and he's got a very interesting personality. Seems like a humble guy. Seems like a guy who's been through a lot. But he had a lot of questions of Lee. Now, we just became aware of Sean in the last year or so. Lee, we've known about for many, many years. He's about our age, and he's a very interesting guy, and he's fun to listen to. Listen to him explain things. He's probably best known for his book, The Case for Christ, and it was made into a documentary, I think, first, and then made into a dramatic movie. And so I would commend all those to you. Lee was an atheist, and his wife became a believer in Jesus, and that wrecked his world, because she had been an agnostic before, so religion had never come between this. But he saw now, this is terrible. It's going to come between us, or she's going to try to convert me. So he thought his only way out of this dilemma was to examine the faith and discredit it. Now, at the time, he was the legal editor of the Chicago Tribune, one of the two well-known newspapers in Chicago. He'd been a legal reporter for them for a number of years, and he had a law degree from Yale University, so he knew the law, he knew investigative reporting, and he just figured, hey, I just examine this thing a little bit, just poke around a little bit, I'll find the holes in it, I'll explain it to my wife, she won't want to have anything to do with it. Well, what he thought would be a weekend's work turned into weeks on end, and after 2 years of this, he had become persuaded himself of the truth of Christianity, and he embraced Jesus. So that episode, going through that episode, what provoked me to do this series was that Sean had a lot of questions. Sean describes himself as a novice in the faith. He's new to the faith, and he's got a lot of questions, wants to ask things. And I noticed that some of the questions that he asked Lee handled very comfortably, and other ones he didn't. Now, Sean had a lot of questions I couldn't answer either. I've said elsewhere that I'm not a Bible answer man, and Lee doesn't pretend to be one either. And Lee and I would not agree on a number of things. Like, he probably thinks people should go to church. He probably thinks if he knew who I was, he would probably say, Mike Gant's crazy. He thinks he can read the Bible and understand God. You need to belong to a church. He probably doesn't think Jesus Christ has come again. But he loves Jesus, and I can share that with him, and I can appreciate the things that he says in that context. But I wanted to answer some of the questions Sean was asking, because it really would have saved me time if someone had put these kind of pointers in there. And the kind of things I'm going to tell you are probably not things that Lee would tell you. Now, because Lee's approach was, because he was an investigative reporter, he would go identify experts in different fields. Like he'd find experts in biblical texts. He'd find experts in medicine to help him understand the crucifixion. He'd find experts in philosophy or religion. And he would quote these people at length in his book, The Case for Christ. And that's how his faith was sort of built up. And I've done some of that type of reading myself, but what I've found is that the Bible itself can provide many, many answers. And I've found that if you really want to have a faith that is not dependent on what other people do, building your faith on what the apostles say about Jesus in the New Testament will be a much more enduring foundation for your faith. So I want to try to answer I'm going to answer the questions that I can answer that Sean was raising. Like some of the things he would ask that I wouldn't feel comfortable opining on were things like, well, what are the rules for engaging with demons and that sort of thing, and a lot of mystical activity, which I don't deny those sorts of things. I mean, Jesus cast out demons, but I don't know as much about those things. I think that if you try to lead a simple life, you can live life without a great deal of exposure to those things. Now, if at some point in my life I become exposed to them, God will give me the grace to handle that, and I'll do that. But I couldn't answer a lot of the unusual questions that Sean was asking. But the kind of questions he asked about, like, well, what Bible to read, and which translation should I use, and what is God, what is his nature? Is God a Trinity or something else? And so those are kind of questions I can answer. And I've got some things that will help you save a lot of time. I went, in my life, like anybody, I've gone down a lot of rabbit holes and taken a lot of digressive paths. And I want to try to show you how to get to your goal much more quickly than I did. Because the goal is to establish a speaking relationship with Jesus Christ, be on speaking terms with him, where you pray and you listen for his word, whether it's his word is written here or his word spoken through his spirit in your heart. So you're on a speaking relationship with him, and then build up that relationship over time so that your confidence in your relationship with him continues to grow year after year, and you can live a life more closely aligned with him. Like it says in Micah 6:8, he has shown you, O man, what is good, but to do justice, to love mercy, and to walk humbly with your God. Well, you walk humbly with your God by walking in the way that he says to walk. So we'll be talking about basics like which translations, which is the right Bible to use. There are three main branches in Christianity: Eastern Orthodoxy, Roman Catholicism, and Protestantism. And they all use slightly different Old Testaments, although they use the same New Testament. We'll talk about that. There's a lot of ideas that, because our society has gotten so far away from the Bible, there's a lot of ideas that people have about the Bible that just are not true, and that they're born of people's lack of familiarity with it. I will talk about the Da Vinci Code, which is a novel by a man named Dan Brown, and how so many people believed what he wrote about the Bible, and they're thinking that they thought it was the accurate part of history. He wrote, of course, a novel, but it was framed in terms of historical events, but he was misrepresenting history in a lot of it. I'll talk about Bart Ehrman, who's representative of most college and graduate school Bible scholars and some of the ways that he does mislead people about the Bible. People don't realize that the New Testament consists of the primary historical sources we have for the life of Jesus. And if you really want to know about Jesus, there's no better way of knowing him from a historical standpoint than to read the New Testament. And in fact, my faith is rooted in history, in that actual history. And that's the surest foundation your faith can have, because history can't be changed. Now, I should hasten to say that the word history can be used in two related but different ways. One way is history can mean simply what happened. What happened? George Washington crossed the Delaware with his army. The other way that the word history can be used is the record of what happened. So that would be the history books that write about Washington crossing the Delaware, or biographies of Washington that cover that subject. So history can be what happened, or it can be what was written about what happened. And the same word can be used in different ways. And all of us do that. I'm pretty convinced that we all use those words. We go back and forth from one to the other without always feeling like we've got to explain it. But the difference is important. But if we want to understand what actually happened, then we want to use the record of what happened that is the most reliable. And there's no more reliable record for what happened in the life of Jesus than the writings of these apostles. But that's not widely known today. Contrast that with colonial times in America, when the Bible was the primary way most people learned to read. The very first book they would read would be the Bible. And so it was just widely known. Even people that didn't necessarily try to imitate Jesus or try to live for him every day still recognized Bible quotes because everybody used it. Everybody learned to read on it. And we've just gotten so far from that today, where we have this aggressive militant secularism which wants to deny any place to the Bible in public life. And so there's a lot of ignorance. We all come to the Bible with a lot of ignorance. It is an ancient book, but it is quite useful to live in modern times to people who want to know what's the right thing to do. But it is an ancient book, so it has regulations in there about if you have slavery, how to deal with it. And a lot of people will just kind of throw out the Bible on that basis, that it even talks about slavery in it without outright condemning it in every single circumstance. It's not that God's in favor of slavery. In fact, he never started it. Slavery was started by human beings. Now, he has, in ancient Israel, tried to regulate the practice and take some of its more onerous aspects away. But if you really know history, you also know that not all slavery was equally onerous or burdensome. It just depends on where it was practiced. And, I'm not here to defend slavery. I don't think it's a good idea. And there's really no excuse for it in the modern world. But in the ancient world, when they didn't have welfare programs and didn't have a lot of the mechanisms that we have today, and they didn't have the Industrial Revolution, which is what allows a lot of work to be done by machines. That was a practice they had. Now, you can look down your nose at them if you want to and say, well, they should never have done that. And a lot of people do that today. But you're not a moral person because of what you condemn. You're only moral because of what you do. So you're not going to impress me if you're going to try to say, well, I would have never done it. Yeah, we can all say that sort of thing. But anyway, that's just kind of an outline of what I want to do. It's Bible basics. And each week we'll spend, up to 15 minutes in a video trying to learn more about it so that you can become comfortable with it and go to it and find guidance from God himself.